Okay, after you,
Waiting.
Christopher. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm waiting for everyone to okay the recording. All right. Well, greetings from chilly Austin, Texas, where it's not supposed to be as cold as it is right now. And I'm grateful today to actually have electricity and no frozen pipes and be able to be with you. I was actually corresponded with David yesterday to tell him what might happen, but it didn't. The last 2 winters in Texas, we have had horrible winter storms that had lots of ice and precipitation and downed power lines all over the city, and the electrical grid in Texas couldn't keep up with demand, and it was a mess. So I'm happy to be here with you. Thank you. Acknowledgements to David for the invitation and for pulling this together. And I acknowledge all of you for taking time from your busy lives for exposure to some ideas. Hopefully there's something here for you today. I've been to Stockholm many times. So as David mentioned, we met in 2013 at a course at CRISP. And I look forward to coming back again. I haven't been there since before COVID. I haven't tried to do this before in terms of trying to give you a reasonable overview of both of these models, the team orientation process and the responsibility process, in a short session. And I don't like using all the time for presenting. So my goal is to use about half the time that we have left for presenting, which means I'm going to really skip across a number of ideas and give you highlights. And then look forward to dig into some discussion or Q&A with you. I hope that's okay with you. This all started when years ago, I was looking to understand a repeatable process for building any team, anytime. And so to do that, first I needed to see if I could do it repeatedly. So I had a year or 2 or 3 of experimenting with me leading other teams, or usually consulting to teams, and seeing if I could, quote, build that team. And then to figure out how to turn it into some kind of a simplified way of understanding it, so that people that didn't have the science background that I had in social sciences could also learn to do this. So we're going to start there with the team orientation process. And on the way there, my style of presenting is a little bit unique in that I don't use any PowerPoints and I don't share screen for a slide presentation. Is that okay with you? Instead, I hold up anything that I want you to see so that you can see it. And I guess one more thing, and that is, are you willing to have your mind be challenged today? Sometimes these are challenging things that go against some things that we've been taught, or our beliefs or ideas that we've been doing our whole lives. And so if you're open to having your mind be challenged, that's a good thing. So let's start here. Let's start with how I define a team. So I define a team as a group of people that step up to the opportunity of a shared responsibility. So the idea of responsibility comes in right away. And there are plenty of people who have written that, that a major competency or skill or characteristic for being a team player is the ability to take responsibility. So if we start there, then the next thing is that about every 10 years since maybe 1940, there's been some major publication, usually a book, that gives the new definitive idea about what is a team and what does it mean to be a high-performance team. And I've read all of them, and they all pretty much reproduce the same information in different languages or from different points of view. And that information is that in high-performance teams, members always go beyond what they've been asked to do, and They constantly actually produce effective results. And the experience of being on the team is its own reward. So does that ring true for you? You know, shake your head or something. Yeah, so for me, this is the essence of high performance team research over the last 80 years or so. And so it's pretty easy to know when we're on a high performance team and when we're not, if we use that as a standard. So I want to walk you through a few steps of the team orientation process. The team orientation process is a flow chart, and I lied. I will share my screen for just a moment. And I'm not seeing what I want to see, so forget it. Now I need to stop trying to share. Okay. So a little bit later, David's going to give you a link to a Google Doc, which is completely shared in public, and it has a bunch of links in the Google Doc to some of the resources that I'm going to mention today. And this is one of them. I will read this to you. Says start. And the first block says state the task as the reason for the team. So task would be step one. The second one is surface member motivation. The third is promote team agreements. The fourth is craft a clear and elevating goal. The fifth is inventory your people to see what they bring and honor differences. And then the diamond at the bottom says, does the team have direction and energy? Right? So those are my primary observable criteria for whether or not a team is built, is do they have shared direction and high energy together? And if not, then you circle back and use the same steps for reorienting. And if they do, then proceed with your work. So I view team building as not a social event, but as a series of conversations that anybody can have anytime with other people that they work with that gives them the best opportunity of coming together as a team. These conversations are based on the science of group cohesion, the science of team building. So here's the first three of the team orientation process, which I call the big three. Usually if you get these three, you're in really good shape. So the first one, I write a little differently. I say, achieve shared clarity about the team task. Achieve shared clarity about the team task. So when I started this work, which is a few decades ago, the science of group cohesion said that the number one predictor of group cohesion was interpersonal attractiveness, right? Or whether or not we like each other. So going back again to the 40s, in the 40s, there was a lot of personality research that was done at the University of Minnesota. And it resulted in things like Myers-Briggs and DISC inventory and other personality inventories. And when I was doing this work in the 90s, people would call my company and they say, do you do team building? Yes. Do you do Myers-Briggs? So doing Myers-Briggs was considered team building. In other words, helping us get along together with each other. During the 80s, the science started shifting. It's called the postmodern era. And the science now was pointing to outcome interdependence as being the primary predictor of whether or not people come together in a group. Outcome interdependence. And what outcome interdependence means is that when you succeed, I succeed, and when I succeed, you succeed. And there's three types of interdependence in the world. especially in organizations. There's positive interdependence, and positive interdependence means when I see you working hard, it makes me want to work hard too. It makes me want to match you because you getting stuff done is getting stuff done for me, and me getting stuff done is getting stuff done for you. So that's what we're looking for in a team, is we're looking for that positive interdependence. And the two other types are negative interdependence, which is built into the competition in many organizations, especially around management. And that is, if you're working hard towards your goals and making progress, you're making my life harder. And if I'm making progress towards my goals, I'm making your life harder, right? So our work is negatively interdependent. And then there's the type of interdependence that so many people ask for at work, and that's to be independent or zero interdependence. So can't you just give me a job that I can do by myself at my computer, not have to interact with anybody else, not have to collaborate, no dependencies, right? And for most of us, there aren't any of those jobs left. So going back to the first thing that I would do to build any team anytime is I would see if I could get the team to achieve shared clarity about what the team task is. What are we a team to do? This is not a mission statement, not a purpose statement necessarily. It could be. It's not necessarily a flowery goal. It's just, what are we a team to do? Oh, we're a team to create this experiment and see what results we get over the next 6 months or 6 weeks, or we're a team to produce this release of this software. It's that clear. And the only way to really get shared clarity around that is through a conversation. So if I only had time to do one thing to build a team, it would be to raise that conversation and make it clear, and then hold on to that shared task. Some people ask me about my choice of the word task, because in project management, a task is kind of a small thing. I chose it as the most generic term I could find. So other terms might be objective, right, or other things. But a different way to think about it was a shared singularity, right? In other words, we're all aligned towards this point in the future, right? And we're all looking at that singularity together. I've found that that's the most powerful thing I can do, especially if my time is limited in trying to build a team. Here we go. So the second thing says to surface member motivation. So for me, this is probably one of the most interesting parts of this process that's missed in so many other approaches to team building. And peer motivation is a very challenging thing to try and figure out how to manage. And motivation or concern about motivation is what causes some of the biggest concerns in people's mind about working in teams. Will my commitment be met? Will other people care as much as I care? Will we have freeloaders on the team that aren't doing their part of the work, but yet they get their share of the rewards, right? So these are all things that are on people's minds when we start building teams. Also, when it comes to organizational rewards of raises and promotions and things like that, then we're concerned about, am I going to be competing with my teammates for the promotion or for the raise or for the title or for whatever? So what I've found is once we have clarity on our shared task, then I'm going to turn my attention to what's in it for each member of the team beyond a paycheck and beyond continued employment. It's interesting to think about what we call the principle of the least invested coworker. And the principle of the least invested coworker says that every team performs to the level of the member who cares the least about the team task. So every team performs to the level of the member who cares the least about the team task. Throughout my career, I've noticed that the general attitude about this from leaders and managers is that if you choose an inspiring team leader, then it will inspire all of those people. And I found that that's not true at all. That actually, having someone that doesn't care about the task being on the team brings down everybody. And that's because of the freeloader effect. The freeloader effect is that if somebody that's not carrying their weight, then we implicitly feel that that's unfair. And we tend to lower our commitment, even if we're a high performer, we tend to lower our commitment to that effort until we can get off of that team and move to another team. May not like it, but we found that that's true. So I always want to know what the level of motivation and interest is in any person in the team. And I spent some time looking for a peer motivation tool, and I found it. And it's a simple, well, maybe it's not so simple. It's a kind of a complicated interview process. Again, a conversation that starts with agreeing to our task. So our task is ABC, and you ask the other person and they say yes. Say, what's in it for you to do that? Right? So that's a pretty common question. What's in it for you? What's in it for me? And they usually answer, but they usually give a surface answer. So remember, this says surface member motivation, which means our real motivation is not on the surface. Our real motivation is hidden, is beneath, maybe even hidden from ourselves. We may not even really understand our real motivation. And so we say, what's in it for you to do that? And they give an answer. Usually it's, oh, it's good for the team. It's good for the company, right? And you watch the person to see if that answer is compelling to them. So this brings in your powers of observation. And usually it's not compelling to them. It's just a kind of a rote answer. So then you probe a little bit and you say, when you get success for the company or for the team, how does that serve you? And they usually come up with another answer. And again, you watch to see if it's compelling for them. And usually it's not. So usually you probe again, say, and when you get that, how does that serve you? Or what does that do for you? Or how does that benefit you? So you really want them to look inside themselves. And then sometimes they will actually go silent a little bit. You'll see their eyes searching, and maybe they'll shift a little bit, and maybe they'll smile, right? Or they'll brighten up a little bit, and they'll say, I get to be part of something great, or, I enjoy being on a great team, or I get a lot of satisfaction out of producing results with others, or something that usually doesn't come up in the beginning. And if you're watching, you can see that it was a shift for them. So you check for compelling. So then you ask the question, is that important to you? And if you're on target, they will say, yeah. And if you're not, they'll say, yeah, maybe. If they say, yeah, maybe, then you circle back and probe again. If they say yes, then you go for a close. So if we can help you working on this team get to experience what gives you a lot of joy to experience, then is that worth your committing to this team, to this project, to this task? And the most frequent answer is absolutely. Absolutely. So some people call this the absolutely interview process. I don't have it written down for you here, but I wanted to give you a flavor of it. So it's something I've used my entire career for peer management. I'll use it for peer motivation management. I'll use it with clients. I'll use it with collaborators. I'll use it with teams. And some people ask, do I do this privately with team members, or do I do it in front of other team members? I eventually want every team member to know what's in it for other team members. I eventually do. And whether we do it publicly with the team or privately is totally a matter of how much safety and trust we already have, and whether we think that we can do that. So let me move along. The third most important conversation is making and keeping agreements. So you're probably familiar with this idea: operating agreements, ways of working. It goes by different names. And for me, it's an ongoing process. It's not just done once and published or hung on the wall. It's a ongoing negotiation, and just creating them isn't the work. It's actually monitoring them is the work, and keeping our focus on the agreements, keeping attention on them. So what kind of agreements? Agreements about timeliness, agreements about how we make decisions, agreements about communication, agreements about confidentiality. In my case, it's whatever is most important. The way I set it up is I give team members time to think about what's the most important behavior that you want to see out of yourself and your colleagues that would make life easy or better for you on this team. And usually work up a set of 6, 8, 10 agreements. I use this to build trust. So I don't say number 3, build trust, but that's what's behind number 3. And today, safety is the vernacular, psychological safety. But what I find is making and keeping agreements builds trust, because trust is the residue of promises kept. And so if we see that people are doing what they say they're going to do, then our trust in each other tends to go up. There's another important reason, and that has to do with group norms. Right? So group norms are the normative behavior for this group. And to understand norms, you need to be able to walk in and be an observer. And it's hard to be an observer of your own group or something you have a history with. So the father of organizational culture studies, Edgar Schein, he used to say that the time that you will see a group or an organization most clearly is on your first visit. That's when that organization shows itself to you. And after that, you start going native, or you start blending in. And so the idea of making and keeping agreements is about getting to normative behavior in the group. And there's 2 ways that norms come about in a group. One way is by default. What is by default? Whatever is tolerated will become normal. So if you tolerate people showing up 20 minutes late for a meeting, that'll become the norm. Right? If you tolerate people not showing up at a stand-up, that'll become the norm. If you tolerate people not communicating in the way that you've agreed to, that will become the norm. So becoming keen to our sense of allowing or tolerating versus catching something and calling it and saying, can we have a discussion about this, is important. So most norms in most groups are there by default. The other way to develop norms is by design. And the way you design norms is by having working agreements, making and keeping agreements. This is a huge skill in team building, is on the fly being able to ask for and make an agreement and then follow up and keep it. So I'm going to leave the team orientation process there, except for this statement. And that is, at the top of the team orientation process, there's a step 0 that doesn't appear on this chart. And the step 0 is to assume 100% responsibility for being on a great team. It doesn't matter what your role is. If you want to be on a great team, guess who gets to assume responsibility for making sure you're on a great team? Only you. And that means that you hold on to the belief that you can be on a great team, that you deserve to be on a great team, that you will be on a great team. And then that you're willing to generate the awareness of what does it take to build a team, right? And at least these 3 to 5 conversations are the things that you want to be aware of. So let's talk about practicing responsibility. So the responsibility process is here behind me, and we publish a poster in 29 languages, which a link to the page on my website will be on that Google Doc that we share. And it's not behind a, we don't ask for your email to download the poster. So the responsibility process is the result of a phenomenological study. So phenomenology is the study of some phenomena in nature. And it often doesn't start with existing theory. It usually starts with simply observation and data collection and cataloging of that phenomenon. So this research started back in the late 70s. I got involved in the early 90s. It was already pretty much laid out like this, but it started because these 2 fellows who were very bright, and they had research level skills, they had scholarly skills, but they didn't work as professors or research scientists, which is why their work wasn't published. But they just started listening to people talking about why they didn't have what they wanted in their life. And they started categorizing the answers that they got. And these are smart people. So these fellows were both coaches, consultants. And they would get together about every 6 months or so, and they would compare notes. So when I first saw this chart, there was just 3 words on it: lay blame, justify, and responsibility. And what that meant was this language of being above the line or below the line, which came out of Erhard's seminar training, EST, in the 1960s. And one of these researchers had been part of that program. And the idea of it being above the line or below the line, they also used the language of owning it or not owning it, was whether or not you are owning your power and ability as a human being to create your results. And so the premise is that we're always creating our reality, right? Our filters, our beliefs, our ideas, our biases, our points of view are always creating our experience of our reality. The issue is that we're just not usually owning that we're creating that. We're usually saying it's somebody else's fault, or it's some excuse about time, environment, economics, process, culture, budget, etc. Or there's something wrong with us, right? So we feel guilty or shame or bad. Or we're trapped. We're trapped. We have to do something we don't want to do. We have to be somebody we don't want to be. We have to put up with having something we don't want to have. So that's obligation. So these are all aspects of what we've been told by psychologists for eons of the victim mindset. And what this research on the responsibility process says is that we all have all of these mental states in us. And so if we want to become more powerful in our lives, if we want to take ownership of our lives, the work is to identify when we're in these mental states called below the line and let that go so that we rise up closer and closer to the mental state of responsibility. And here, responsibility means the ability to respond, right? So going all the way back to Socrates, philosophers and psychologists have for eons written about the human's ability to respond. And that's really the basis of this model is we all have the ability to respond to anything if we're willing to own it. Right. So let me give you a little bit of way to think about this. So there's lots of people out there that talk about a model of the mind that I call the two-mind model, in which we have an upper mind and a lower mind. And the upper mind is often called the resource mind, the creative mind, or the growth mind. And the lower mind is called the ego mind, the defensive mind, or the resistant mind. How many of you have one of these ego, defensive, resistant minds? Anybody? Anybody willing to admit it? All right. Yeah. So here we have an above the line and a below the line kind of a notion of our minds. Now, here's the really interesting thing. The really interesting thing is the drivers in the two minds. Let's start with the lower mind. The drivers in the lower mind are approval, safety, and control. Approval, safety, and control. The drivers in the upper mind are your unique genius and your unique inspiration, i.e., what's in it for you. Right? And together, they come to what you really, really, really want in your life. You could also put authenticity here. Now, the issue here is that our cultures tend to use the lower mind to shape us into being good, quote, responsible citizens. And so we're highly conditioned to access our lower mind in order to survive. So many of our motivations are around survival, being approved of, right? Having some control over our life, feeling safe. So the hard part about addressing when we're below the line is that seriously, some of our quote needs for being approved of or in control or safe are being met. And we actually have to actually let go of those in order to move into responsibility where we can be more of who we are. How does the responsibility process get triggered? So I'm going to leave that for you to think about. I'm going to talk about how the responsibility process gets triggered. So I want you to think about this as a pattern or a process in your mind, and it gets triggered every time something goes wrong. Every time something in your world isn't quite right. So how many times a day do things go wrong? Anybody? Dozens? All right. And what do we have all those emergency meetings about at work? Problems, right? Things going wrong. That means that this process is extremely active in ourselves and everybody else when we're doing problem solving, which is a major function of having a job and being part of a group or a team. So let's talk about, so the science behind this, the psychology behind this is quite precise. I'm about to finish up here so that we can have Q&A. So what happens is that in a moment, there's a conflict between what we want and what we have. So these are two little vectors running into each other. So let's say I just want to enjoy a nice cup of tea. Oops, I want to enjoy a nice cup of tea. And I go to the kitchen and I make the tea and I start heading towards where I want to sit down and drink it. And I trip over something on the floor and I go flying and the tea goes all over me and on the floor. At that moment, what I want and what I have are in conflict. And that means that there's little tiny amounts of energy in the brain that are running into each other. And that causes what I call angst or anxiety. So it throws off some heat called angst. And that triggers the responsibility process. And we enter the process at blame. So in order to get to responsibility around any problem, usually we have to catch ourselves blaming, right? Who put that thing there on the floor? We have to catch ourselves justifying. We have to, and stop it. We have to catch ourselves beating ourselves up and stop it. To catch ourselves feeling trapped and stop it. And then we can start moving into responsibility. If you'd like some homework, I can give you some homework, and that is the language of have to, however you express that in your native language. The language of have to. Catch yourself saying, I have to, and stop, and refuse to be trapped or burdened. So how many of you have to go to some stupid meeting? Hopefully not this one. Anybody? Yeah. How many of you have to go to some kids thing after the workday? You say to your buddies, oh, I'd really like to go have a frosty beverage with you, but I have a kid thing I have to go to. Right? Anybody? How many of you have to go to your in-laws for holiday? Anybody? All right. So the language of have to is really prevalent. What I've learned is that for professionals, when we start studying responsibility and start practicing responsibility, we get pretty good at catching and letting go of blame and justify, but we get really trapped in shame and obligation. Why? Because of our conditioning. We're so conditioned. And the more high performers we are, the more conditioned we are to shame and obligation. So that's where the work is. And if you can catch yourself in obligation saying have to, then the work is to refuse to feel trapped. So I no longer say, even little things, I no longer say I have to go to the bathroom. I say, I want to go to the bathroom, right? I no longer say I have to go to the store. I say, I want to go get the good food and goodies that I want for dinner, right? I no longer say I have to go to this stupid meeting. I say, I am going to this stupid meeting because I haven't figured out a way to change it or get out of it, right? So doing that implies volition. It implies that you're in charge of where you're taking your body or what you're doing, and you're not doing it out of a trap or out of obligation. So the responsibility process, once you learn about it, is just a signal device. And that means in my mind now, I know that it's here. I know it'll never go away. I can't delete any portion of it. I know every time something goes wrong in my life, my first thought is going to be blame. The game is how quickly can I get from the bottom to the top? And in my life, I get from blame to responsibility in about half a second. I spend very little time in any of these mental states, although they're all still there. So you can't do anything about the responsibility process except use it as a signal device. So here's what you can do something about. You can do something about the 3 keys to responsibility and self-leadership. And those keys are intention, your power of intention, which is part of your consciousness, your power of awareness, also part of your consciousness, means what are you paying attention to? In other words, am I paying attention to justify, or am I paying attention to my power to create and choose something different? Right? And confront, also part of your consciousness. Confront just means the ability to face. So it turns out that we have a complete range in our humanness, in our consciousness, of things that we can face easily and directly, and things that we can't face, things that we run from, things that we avoid, things that we aren't willing to go look in that dark closet, look at that shadow part of ourself. So to practice responsibility means repeated application of intention. Do I intend to take ownership, and do I know what I want? Awareness, what am I paying attention to? And confront, what is there for me to face that I'm not facing? So think about facing yourself in the mirror. It really means examining our thoughts. Our mind is full of aberration, full of aberrant conditioning, full of weird thoughts. And for me, confront means to start inventorying my thoughts, my assumptions, my beliefs, around whatever problem I'm dealing with, so that I can clear those things that aren't functional or helpful, and move along. In terms of teams, what we like to say is when we operate in blame and justify, we get no results. So think of a time when you've been part of a problem-solving group that's met for weeks or months, and the conversation never got out of blame and justify. And you'll probably agree with me that you produced absolutely no results for all the tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars of your company's money that you were spending. In shame and obligation, we get results, but they're unsatisfying results, right? So we use shame and obligation to control each other as a way to hopefully get some kind of results, even control ourselves, because it produces action. Shame produces more anxiety. We know that if we get into action, it'll alleviate the anxiety. So parents, teachers, managers use shame to control and motivate other people. But we're not really focused on what we want. We're focused on getting out of trouble or getting through the trap. So we get unsatisfying results. And only in responsibility do we produce results that matter. And that's where I'm going to leave it for now. I hope I left a little time for some discussion. So I'd love to hear what's on your mind.
Thank you so much, Christopher. Should I share the document now or wait until after?
Yeah, I'd say share it a little bit later, because if you share it now, the rule of a trainer is never pass out something that you don't want people to pay attention to now. So why don't you do it in about 10 minutes?
I'll do that.
Great. And then in your follow-up. So if you have a question, turn on your webcam or a comment and do this so that I can see you. Chris?
No, I was just waving back. I didn't realize that was a signal to saying something.
You see, so I don't see that little blue icon, but I will see this. Yeah. So what's on your mind? Marcus.
I don't think I have like formulated a sharp question, but what's going on in my mind is, of course, teams that has been there for a while, and thoughts about, okay, is this a team that could be saved, or is this a team that is lost forever? If you understand what I mean, because I
Sure.
work with a lot of different teams, and sometimes I see teams and I see the only reasonable way forward is to make changes with the setup of the team to like get some kind of fresh air into it. What's your thought on that?
Right. So people who find it easy to hire and fire, usually executives, traditionally they view chemistry as what they want on their team, and they identify where someone doesn't have chemistry with everybody else, and they decide to move that person along and find someone to bring in with chemistry. Most of us don't have the ability to hire and fire, and many of us don't want to, right? So I actually believe that any team is worth trying to save, and the process is the same as building a new team, except that you get to overcome the norms that are already in place. Right? So building a new team is easy because there are no norms. You get to create them. But trying to resurrect an existing team is more challenging, and it can still be done. If you're willing to take responsibility for having or being on a great team, and if you're willing to believe that it can be done, right? So those are two things that most people aren't willing to sign up for. And then if you know the conversations to have or the experiments to try to see if you can shift the team. Those are my thoughts, Marcus.
Thank you very much for that.
Yeah, you're welcome. David.
Can I follow up a little on that? Because when you talk a little about these teams, you also mentioned that I mean it's kind of a choice where you're stepping up to the responsibility to work towards this common target. But if you have people in the team, not everyone are doing that. They're more tagging along basically, but they're not really agreeing on the targets. So I'm not sure where they are in the responsibility. But if you have that, then you don't really have the fundamentals what you need for a working team. What do you do then?
So I encourage people to own the fact that they're calling something a team that's not a team.
Mm.
Right? And make a decision about whether you want this group to be a team or not.
Mm.
So we use the term team very loosely. And I suggest using the term team more specifically to mean a group of people that step up to shared responsibility towards some outcome. And I actually refuse to work in most groups. I've been invited to join boards. I've been invited to join committees. And I ask them, you know, do you want to work as a team or do you want to work as a traditional board or committee? And if they don't say they want to work as a team, then I say that I'm not available for that. That's just my bias of understanding what it means to be team and understanding what a real team can produce. Yeah. And then, you know, I guess then as a leader or a consultant or a coach, it's really about how do I create an interesting invitation that people would want to, that people would have some interest in becoming a team, as opposed to imposing it. Did I address your question, David?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so.
Yeah, for many of you, you might be thinking of a work group, maybe one that you lead. I realize this is a leadership group. I've had clients and members of there's a virtual program I do called Responsibility Immersion. I've had folks in that group that realized they wanted to start by actually building their peer team. Right. So if you're a director, maybe build a team of your fellow directors. What else? Oh, how do I say your name? Dan Wee?
I've gotten the feedback that I pronounce it differently every time, so I'm not picky. That was great. I have maybe a clarifying ask, because when you say, for example, earlier you said 100% responsibility to be on a great team is on you. And yeah, you also reflected that this is a leadership group. But do you mean when you say the responsibility is on you, leaders exclusively? Or do you mean everybody that is part of a team has that responsibility?
No, I mean you individually. Right. So whether you are in a leadership role or whether you're in a participant role, it doesn't matter. If you want to be on a great team, there's only one person that can make that happen.
Yeah, I like that.
If it doesn't happen naturally, and the number of teams that come together naturally and become high performance teams is very minimal. Right. So most teams are what I call middling teams. Right. They're kind of middle performers. There's not a tremendous amount of enjoyment being on the team. They're not operating as a team. They're not communicating as a team. They're not producing results over and over and over. They're not celebrating the fact that they, you know, that their reward is being part of the team. You know, when years ago, I interviewed a lot of people about there's a failed program at Exxon. And it was about, I don't know, 120 people on 10 or 12 teams. And I got to interview almost everybody, and I asked them a very pointed question, and that is, to what do you attribute your participation in this failed program? And the number one answer was, I guess I got put on a bad team.
Oh.
So on my chart, where is that answer?
Lame.
Lame.
Yeah, blame or justify, right? Yeah. And that's when I woke up in the middle of the night with the epiphany that you're not going to be on a great team unless you choose to be responsible for being on a great team.
It's like saying, it's like when you complain about traffic, that you're part of the traffic as well.
Exactly. Laurent.
Well, maybe not a very sharp question either, but so I've been reflecting on pride and the fact that I found out that, of course, teams which are very effective tends to be very proud of their work. And that actually creates some very positive will, right? Like, but it also can go the other way around. Like if people are not very proud of what they're producing for whatever reason, then people typically want to leave the team, and maybe the management doesn't want to put more resources, and that sort of create a negative flywheel. Have you been in contact with, say, teams which are not very proud of what they're doing, and how do you fix that?
I don't know any other tools than the ones that I've just introduced you to.
Okay.
So in other words, I would probably stop calling them a team because they aren't. I'd probably ask them if they'd like to be a team. Right. So my work here, understanding responsibility the way I do, I keep the choice on them. It's not my job to build them. It's not my job to make them wrong for being a group instead of a team. So I operate from invitation, and I put the choice in their hands, and I offer my assistance. And then I'll facilitate the conversations, these 5 conversations. And certainly since I did this work, there are plenty of other things in terms of process approaches to teams. And, you know, so this work was all done before the Agile Manifesto and the Agile Alliance. My book on teamwork as an individual skill, was actually published, and you'll have a link to this, was actually published in 2001, which is when the manifesto was. And when I saw the process and tools and frameworks that I was unfamiliar with, because I didn't work in the software development lifecycle, I worked in organizational change. I saw a lot of beauty in, for instance, the Scrum and Lean and Kanban, and I saw those tools that approached what I knew as how teams normally work. So I don't want to claim that these are the only things to do to build a team, but they're the conversations that I know that a team can have that gives them the best opportunity of coming together as a team. Or it will, as they say about Scrum, it will expose why they can't be a team so that you can do something about it. It will expose that somebody is in the group that has absolutely no interest in what the group is supposed to be doing. And so maybe the team's job is to help that person find a place where they can bring more interest.
Makes sense.
Yeah. David.
Sorry. I can add just a reflection, but because one of the things I took with me since I had a workshop with you many years ago was this thing about stepping up to the responsibility, more the way I handle myself, actually. Because you kind of, sometimes you're a little inclined to being, someone is going to give you some target that you feel committed to. But in all of that, there's also a choice where you choose to say that I am stepping up to responsibility to make this work. And what is there in that process that's kind of find the things that in it for me in that process. So I take the responsibility of making that happen. It's not my manager's role to make it happen for me. That at least was something that I think changed me a bit. a bit spoiled to be waiting for someone to motivate me to some extent.
Yeah, thank you. I'm noticing the time. I don't have anything pressing. I'm happy to stay, but I want to honor you. So I'll offer you so go ahead and share the document, and I'll offer a little closing thought, and something that I have resisted and hated a lot, this little idea, and that is, for things to change, first I must change. So for things out there to change, first I must change. When I change the way I look at things, in other words, looking at them from responsibility versus victimization, then those things change and they become much easier for me to do something about. So that's my wish for you. There's a contact information for me in this document that David's sharing. So please get in touch if I can be useful to you. And let me put in a word for Responsibility Immersion. So Responsibility Immersion is a 20-week virtual program that helps you really develop a responsibility practice by indulging in a culture of responsibility. So me and a bunch of faculty members who've been practicing for a long time lead all of the sessions. And our next one starts on the 21st. It's really great leadership development stuff. So take a look at that. And thank you all very much. And I love you all very much. And the world needs your stepping up. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so
That was
much.
awesome. And thanks everyone for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.